Hello everyone. This video will be breaking down everything you need to dominate with Mage for Season 3. Season 3 brought about a lot of changes, so I thought an updated guide was in order. I will be discussing Firestaff and Ice Gauntlet skill trees, attributes, gear, gameplay tips, matchups and more. For those who watched my previous guide, I will be repeating some tips/advice, but I will be sharing new tips that I learned with Season 3 as well. If you want to skip around to the new tips or skip past the old tips, feel free using the timestamps below. Without further ado, let's get into the guide. Starting with gear, let's discuss the different options you have with Firestaff. This is the Firestaff that I have been seeing the most success with. Starting with the easy perk choices, Flame Attunement and Empowering Fireball are just two very solid perks. The damage output you get from running these perks is just too high to not run. Now, you can be a little more flexible with the third perk, but I do think Alacrity's Punishment is best in slot. With all the haste in the game, you actually end up getting a ton of value out of this perk. You will pretty much just get a plus 20% damage increase against healers, muskets, bows, rapiers, and great axes, just because of how consistently they get haste. This perk is decent against Firestaff and Ice Gauntlet as well, depending on the perks they are running. Pretty much all of your targets, which are squishy damage dealers, are going to have some form of haste, which is why I think this perk is best in slot. However, there are still a lot of other good options. Another staff I like a lot is this Keen Speed staff. This staff is probably the best when 1vxing, due to the distance you get from melees and because you become a harder target to hit. The only downside would be the rising popularity of Alacrity's Punishment, so when I use this staff, I just pray that the Firestaffs I encounter don't run it. Otherwise, it is a very good staff to run. Other very solid choices would be Vicious or Keen. I did a thorough damage test with a Keen staff and Vicious staff, and they do very similar damage. So if you want a very solid staff, I would prioritize Keen over Vicious, just because of the extra mana you get from the crit chance. A very good budget staff you can farm is a fire staff called a Madhouse. It rolls with Keen and Empowering Fireball, and you can choose a third perk, such as Flame Attunement. Overall, you have a lot of great options for Firestaff. I would say that these four staves are the four strongest in this meta. Moving on to Ice Gauntlet. Now honestly, you can be extremely flexible with the perks. The only real best in slot perk is Healing Tomb. Healing Tomb will heal for about 3k HP with Ankh, and that is just a very solid, consistent perk. Some of you may think that a different perk may be stronger, such as Unending Thaw or Empowering Spike. Unending Thaw should be on your armor, as you don't really want Storm for the damage, you want it for the chill and frost effect after enemies leave the storm, which doesn't change from weapon to armor. As for Empowering Spike, I honestly really want to like it, but it just isn't the best perk in my opinion. If we choose to run Spike, Storm, and Entomb, the only real route Mage has access to would be the Heavy Freeze perk, which isn't even a good form of CC. An Ice Gauntlet heavy attack is honestly just too telegraphed, so a lot of players just dodge and you don't get any value out of Empowering Spike. Yes, there are times where you land Heavy Freeze into triple hit Empowered Spike and you just delete people, but it's just too inconsistent. An argument can be made to drop Entomb for Ice Shower to combo with Empowered Spike, but in my opinion, Entomb is completely overpowered and too good to drop. Empowering Spike becomes viable when you run the Grasping Vines Heartrune, but even then I think it gets outclassed by the value and consistency of Healing Tomb. Moving on to the other perks on the weapon, I've found Keen and Vicious to be great DPS perks, but I experimented with a lot of other damage perks, such as Keenly Empowered, Shirking Frost, Keenly Jagged, and they all do great. I just prefer Keen and Vicious for maximum, consistent burst potential. Now this is what everyone is probably wondering. What perks are best on armor after the Shirking Heals nerf? Simply put, it is still Shirking Heals. With Ankh, nerf Shirking Heals will still heal for 3k to 3.5k health every 5 seconds, which is extremely strong. I will also be discussing some tech later in the video you can do that will make Shirking Heals even stronger for mages. Moving on from Shirking Heals, health is just a requirement for armor. It's pretty much the new Resilient. It's the epitome of a great consistent perk. It synergizes with Shirking Heals, and prevents you from getting bursted, especially with the higher damage output a lot of builds got with Season 3. As for the third perk, you can be a little more flexible with this one. I would use this perk to pick up some nice perks that you prefer. For example, I used my third perk on my legging for Shirking Energy, which I would say is a mandatory perk, and my third perk on my gloves is Unending Thaw. For the third perk for other armor slots, I went with Refreshing, just because it was on a lot of the named drops I farmed and used, but other good options would be Enchanted Ward and Fire Harnessing. Moving on to jewelry. For the amulet, it is no surprise that I am running Ankh. Ankh simply put is just a very strong artifact, especially with Shirking Heals. Additionally, it synergizes with many other aspects of Mage's kit, such as Healthy Toast, Healing Tomb, and stone form. Overall, it is just a very strong amulet to run. For my ring, I am just running the Champion's Ring. Hardy I would say is mandatory for any light player. Keen Awareness is nice as it is a good damage perk along with helping with mana management. And Invig Punishment is still a decent perk, even after its nerf. For my earring, I run Healthy Toast, Refreshing Toast, and Regenerating. Healthy Toast is just a great perk for mages. You are already going to be chugging mana pots, so why not get some extra health on top of that? Even nerfed, mana pots will still heal for around 1k to 1.3k HP, which makes it a good perk. We also run Refreshing Toast. To be honest, it is a mediocre perk, but we mainly run this as there aren't too many good options for earring. And lastly we run Regenerating. With Ankh, Regenerating will heal for around 1k to 1.3k HP every 10 seconds, which is decent. The passive healing feels great. Next up, Heartrunes. Obviously you can be a little more flexible with your Heartrune choice. Honestly just run what you think is fun. But competitively, the best Heartrune is probably going to be stone form. Not only does this act like a second life, it also benefits from the Ankh healing. Overall, it's just a great value, consistent Heartrune that can get you out of dangerous situations. However, if you want to use an offensive Heartrune, I recommend Grasping Vines. This is probably my favorite Heartrune, especially after the Detonate nerfs. It can be used defensively and offensively, but my favorite part about it is that you can use it mid-burnout and exit your burnout early. This combo is amazing and pretty much no one expects it. Overall, Grasping Vines is another great choice to run for a Heartrune. Moving on to my attribute setup. This is what I like to run. I like to take 150 con, just for the health and extra crit resistance. I like to take 25 dex for the crit chance, not only for damage, but also for mana. Now, I would say you have to at least take 350 intelligence, however, you can be a little more flexible with the remaining stat points. I personally, just like to put all the points into in after reaching 25 dex and 150 con, as it leads to the most damage. Some may say that it would be better to take 50 strength, for the increased auto attack damage. I thought this too and I ran it for a while, which honestly felt great. But after doing more testing, putting 50 points into strength only leads to a 100 damage difference to auto attacks versus putting those 50 points into intelligence. However, putting the 50 points into intelligence will add 200 to 300 damage to each ability, which in my opinion is better than extra 100 damage to auto attacks. Though you can honestly test both out. Both feel great and the damage difference isn't huge. 428 intelligence is only slightly better than a 50 strength split. If you are looking for a stat split that helps your survivability, instead of reaching 428 intelligence, you can invest some of those stat points into focus. Not only does this result in 5% CDR but also will give you 10% more incoming heals, which synergizes great with Shirking heals. Honestly, you have a lot of freedom with the attribute split this season as you have so much to work with. Test out different splits and pick and choose your favorites. Moving on to the weapon skill trees. Starting with Firestaff, this is what I like to run for Firestaff. Pillar and Fireball are going to be your bread and butter abilities. Both of these spells are versatile and consistent, doing great damage against melee and ranged players. I would say that these spells outperform Incinerate and Flamethrower, as against better players, Incinerate and Flamethrower are easy abilities to avoid and punish. Moving on, Burnout is a must for Firestaff. The mobility, along with the surprising amount of damage the Burnout explosion brings, is just too invaluable. Overall, the skill tree is pretty similar to what you would run last season. The only notable change is that we picked up 2 mana perks. As mages no longer gain mana on dodges and instead get mana on crits, Arson's Advantage and Spell Focus really helps with mana management. The rest of the perks are pretty straightforward and standard. In order to get more points to slot towards mana perks, I decided to drop the Haste perk on the right skill tree. I chose to drop this perk due to the rising popularity of Alacritus Punishment. Moving on to the Ice Gauntlet tree. The Ice Gauntlet tree can be much more flexible than the Firestaff tree, as many of the Ice Gauntlet abilities specialize in their own respective roles and playstyles. The skill tree you see here is specialized to be a balance between some extra burst damage and survivability. Everything you see under the left skill tree is purposed towards facilitating burst damage with the Ice Spike. We don't take any points under Storm, as Storm's role is to apply chill for more spike damage and for a potential heavy freeze route. Meanwhile, everything on the right skill tree is purposed towards utility and survival. We take both perks under Tomb, to get the debuff cleanse. I personally think that the debuff cleanse, especially in this damage over time and debuff meta, is invaluable. Another essential perk to pick up is the Refreshing Frost perk. If used correctly, this single perk will drastically reduce your Ice Gauntlet cooldowns, allowing you to use multiple cooldowns per fight. This is my personal favorite skill tree to run, but if you would rather run Ice Shower or Pylon, feel free to do so. The only important perk I suggest you pick up for all these different Ice Gauntlet setup is Refreshing Frost. It is good for pretty much all Ice Gauntlet builds. Now that we have finished the gear and set up part of the build, let's talk about some tricks regarding Firestaff and Ice Gauntlet. I will be starting with some old Firestaff tips and tricks. If you have already watched my previous guide, feel free to skip this section and go to the new tips and tricks section. My biggest tip for Firestaff is just to stress the importance of landing auto attacks. Weaving in heavy and light attack in between spells is crucial. Without the threat of chip damage from these auto attacks, most opponents will save their stamina to dodge your heavy hitting attacks, such as Fireball and Pillar. Besides Pillar, Firestaff's abilities are pretty telegraphed, meaning that against better players who can consistently dodge Fireball and Burnout, auto attacks become even more crucial. Not only for chip damage, but as we took the Fiery Restoration perk in our skill tree, landing heavies will also mean we will get our Firestaff cooldown faster, leading to multiple CD cycles in fights. Another trick with Firestaff I would like to share is with the Pillar ability. I refer to it as a sky pillar, but pretty much if you look up at the sky, you can position Pillar on top of an elevated surface and even over walls. If you can get good with landing a sky pillar, you will find that you can heavily punish people who stand on top of OPR fort walls for too long. Here are some clips showcasing how to perform this trick. Moving on to some tips and tricks with Ice Gauntlet. If you have watched my previous guide, feel free to skip to the new tips and tricks section. The most important tip I must stress about Ice Gauntlet is to try your best to use abilities in Storm. The perk we picked up in the skill tree, Refreshing Frost, is just so strong. It allows me to use Ice Gauntlet cooldowns 2 times per fight, compared to once if I did not use my abilities in Storm. An example of this would be to spike, then storm on top of yourself and entomb. You will notice that spike is already nearly off cooldown, and I can spike immediately after entomb expires. I also have some advice for getting better at landing ice spikes. A tip that helped me was looking down while spiking. This is a better angle and you can see exactly when to stop the spike versus looking exactly at your target. However, this tip will not suddenly make you land every spike. To be honest, the only thing you can really do is practice. Going around doing PvE activities and spiking every mob you see is honestly great practice. Eventually you will get the feel for spike and you will be consistently getting double and triple hits with it. Now moving on to the new tips and tricks that I did not discuss in my last guide. Let's start with burnout tips. Overall, burnout is a very easy ability to punish. It is extremely easy to get hit during the wind-up phase, and still easy to get hit during the burnout. I recommend to pay attention to the players that pose a threat to you, such as Great Axe Reap or Spear Sweep that can punish you during burnout's wind-up. As soon as you see the animation for an attack, cancel the burnout with a dodge, then burnout right after. Most of the time, players are still in an attack animation and will not be able to punish the second burnout, but most players won't be expecting the cancel to begin with. Additionally, once you have started moving in the burnout, try to make your path as unpredictable as possible. One strategy is to go to the side, then try to end the burnout on top of the player. This not only will result in more damage due to the explosion at the end of burnout, but will also make you harder to hit, compared to dashing straight at them. Another tip I must really stress is related to entomb. I only discovered this recently with the popularity of Shirking heals, but apparently this has been in the game for a while. When entering entomb, it is actually counted as an iframe. As a result, you can actually proc Shirking heals and Shirking empower when entombing an attack. This is why I believe Shirking heals to be even stronger on Mage, compared to other classes. Not only can you use entomb to dodge attacks, and to regain stamina if you stam out, but you can also proc Shirking heals without stamina, which obviously is very strong. The last Ice Gauntlet tip is related to Ice Spike, or more specifically, right after the spike. Due to Ice Spike stagger, you can actually weave in a light attack right after spike. The light attack comes out very quickly after Ice Spike for some reason, so most of the time, you can hit them for another 1 to 1.5k damage for free when they are staggered. I will now discuss some of the matchups that you will encounter as a mage. If you watched my previous guide, a lot of this information will be repeated. However, with the new meta, some of the matchups have changed. One matchup you will face very often is against Bruiser or melee DPS builds. This is Mage's best matchup. This matchup is a little more difficult in Season 3 due to the higher average damage of Bruisers. Because of this higher damage, this makes mistakes against Bruisers much more punishing compared to Season 2. However, Mage still has great tools to deal with Bruisers, such as Burnout and Entomb. If you properly use your abilities, dodge important CC, and kite well, you are favored in this matchup. Moving on to bows. Bows are a very situational matchup. If they see you approaching from further away, you are at a huge disadvantage and it is Mage's most difficult matchup. They simply outrange you and Firestaff abilities and autos become much more telegraphed from further away. You should be doing everything in your power to close the distance as much as you can. Move unpredictably, time your dodges well, and use terrain to get closer. Once you have gotten close, the matchup becomes much more even. I have noticed that with my recent use of Alacritus punishment, this matchup has gotten way easier compared to Season 2, as bows end up getting haste very frequently. Muskets are similar to bows, where your entire focus should be to get close. The difference however is that musket has less tools to fight close range compared to bow, so if you manage to close the distance, you should easily win the fight. The Mage versus Mage matchup is probably the most straightforward. Whoever can dodge/negate more heavy hitting spells will win. Fireball has a very telegraphed wind-up, pay attention and try your best to dodge it. Pillar is the opposite where there is very little wind-up and is almost instant. The only thing you can really do is try to predict when the mage is going to pillar. As for Ice Spike, it is all about predicting when the enemy mage will spike. Key moments I would look out for would be as soon as the mage pulls out the Ice Gauntlet, right after a storm, or right after a heavy attack. Moving on to the tank matchup. This matchup was pretty much impossible to win or lose in Season 2. With the introduction of Shirking heals, more attribute points, and even the wall artifact, this matchup is now favored towards tanks. Tanks now just have too many methods of negating damage, healing, and straight up too much health for you to kill them. Fortunately, it is very unlikely that tanks will be able to catch you, so the matchup will most likely be a stalemate. However, the only reason it is slightly favored towards tanks is if the tank player is skilled at punishing you and times their CC well, they have a small chance at killing you. Moving on to the healer matchup. This matchup in Season 2 was also a stalemate matchup. In the past, you just simply didn't have enough damage to kill them. However, similar to bows, healers also have access to a lot of haste. This in combination with the much higher damage that Season 3 Mage as compared to Season 2 Mage, healers have become much easier to kill. This matchup is still likely to end in a stalemate, especially if the healer dodges and heals well, but I would say this matchup is now more favored towards mages. I will now talk about the playstyle of mages for Season 3, with the popularity of Shirking heals. Firstly, let's discuss how you should be dodging while stacking Shirking heals. I must stress the importance of conserving your stamina with this build. Do not panic roll, every point of stamina is invaluable, as 1 point of stamina could be a dodge, which will not only save you health from dodging an attack, but also will heal you for 3k. It is okay to get hit by non-threatening attacks, such as a lone auto attack. Save your stamina for dangerous CC and heavy hitting abilities. Additionally, play more aggressive when full or close to full HP. With Shirking heals, you will most likely immediately heal back any punishment they dish out while your HP is close to full. Take advantage of this window to trade and dish out as much damage as possible. Moving on to how to fight people with Shirking heals. The most important aspect of this fight is to avoid telegraphed attacks. Avoid doing the same combos, which is something I need to work on. Avoid always doing heavy attacks, mix it up. Throw in some light attacks. Make it as difficult as possible for the opponent to use your attacks as a chance to heal. Something you can do is purposely miss your autos, so they blow stamina and don't even get a heal. There have been many times where I anticipate an auto attack, roll to try to heal off it, and they miss, resulting in me blowing stamina and not even healing. Thank you for watching. I hope this guide was helpful to you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments.